Hey, my friend. Today we're back with PaleoPulse to dive into the topic, Japan once had real kaiju. Let's explore it together. The world has a surprisingly long list of things to thank Japan for. Sushi, anime, giant mecha robots, and of course, one of the most famous animals of all time. An animal that thankfully is fictional, or at least we hope so, Godzilla. That iconic atomic breathing monster has been stomping through pop culture since 1954. And if you've ever looked at Godzilla closely, you've probably noticed something familiar. The posture, the teeth, the tail. Godzilla doesn't just look like a monster, he looks suspiciously like a dinosaur. And that's no accident. His design was inspired by a mix of Tyrannosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Iguanodon, which is ironic when you consider that none of those dinosaurs ever lived in Japan, at least as far as we know. But here's the twist. Japan absolutely did have dinosaurs, and during the Cretaceous period, it was less of a peaceful island chain and more of a prehistoric nightmare, a place where staying in one piece was never guaranteed. These dinosaurs were not cute. They were not friendly. And what makes it even stranger is that Japan was home to an incredibly bizarre mix of species, animals you would never expect to find together in one place. It's almost like Japan was collecting dinosaurs the way people collect Pokémon, leading to one big question: how did all of these animals even get there? Today, Japan feels isolated. Most of its land sits about 200 kilometers or 124 miles away from mainland Asia. But in deep time, Japan was not always an island nation. In fact, depending on sea levels and tectonic activity, Japan has worn many shapes over its long history. Sometimes it was an archipelago, other times it was a long strip of land, and at certain points it was even a peninsula physically connected to China. Whatever form it took, one thing remained consistent: it was bursting with life. Fossils show that nearly every niche was filled, from coastlines to forests to freshwater systems. Add to that Japan's intense volcanic activity, both then and now thanks to the Ring of Fire, and you get incredibly fertile land. Volcanic soils are nutrient-rich, and in the Cretaceous, that fertility turned large parts of Japan into biological hotspots. That said, the similarities between ancient Japan and modern Japan pretty much end there. The climate alone was wildly different. Instead of today's relatively stable seasonal patterns, Cretaceous Japan experienced chaotic swings between cold, dry conditions and warm, humid phases. You would have felt it immediately in the air. The forests reflected this instability too. Forget cherry blossoms and sakura trees, those iconic plants weren't around yet. Instead, the landscape was dominated by cycads, cypresses, ferns, and fruit-bearing trees, creating dense, almost primeval forests that felt more like something out of a sci-fi movie than modern East Asia. Life flourished across the entire Cretaceous period, but the real boom happened during the early part of the period. Fossil formations suggest that dinosaurs of nearly every major group wanted a piece of what would one day become Japan. The diversity here is genuinely mind-blowing, and some of the animals present make absolutely no sense at first glance. Take, for example, what may have been the largest predator in Japan at the time, a Spinosaurid. Yes, a Spinosaur. When you hear that word, you probably think of Spinosaurus from North Africa or maybe Baryonyx from Europe. Asia doesn't usually come to mind, and yet Spinosaurs did make their way to Asia, and some evidence even suggests they may have originated there. Still, they were rare, and their presence in Japan is especially strange. So far, the only evidence we have for a Japanese Spinosaurid comes from two sets of teeth. That might sound flimsy, but Spinosaur teeth are extremely distinctive. They have multiple automorphoses, traits unique to that group alone, so paleontologists are confident these teeth belonged to a Spinosaurid, and likely a medium to large one. Based on size comparisons with Baryonyx, estimates suggest this animal could have been between 7.5 and 10 meters long, or roughly 25 to 33 feet, and potentially weighed over 2 tons. That's more than 4 times heavier than an average male polar bear. To be fair, estimating size from teeth alone is tricky, but the clues are hard to ignore.
Interestingly, the teeth resemble those of Siamosaurus, another Asian Spinosaurid, more than Baryonyx. If that's the case, then this Japanese Spino probably shared a similar lifestyle, and that's bad news for just about everything else. Siamosaurus was deceptively bloodthirsty. Its conical teeth and crocodile-like snout point to a life spent near rivers and lakes, hunting fish as its primary food source, something backed up by isocopic analysis. But that's not all. Sauropod remains have been found embedded in Spinosaurid teeth, strongly suggesting that these animals didn't just scavenge large dinosaurs, they actively hunted them. While their teeth alone couldn't do all the work, their massive claws certainly could, raking flesh and piercing vulnerable areas with terrifying efficiency. Because of this, researchers believe the Japanese Spinosaurid likely sat at the top of the food chain, at least around freshwater systems. Lakes, rivers, and streams would have been its domain, along with the surrounding floodplains. And the scenario makes sense, especially when you look at the local sauropods. Japan was home to species like Fukui titan and Tamba titanus, both members of the titanosaur family. Titanosaurs are famous for their enormous size, but these two were actually quite small by titanosaur standards. Most estimates put them at around 10 meters long, or about 33 feet, with weights around 5 tons. That's not tiny, but for sauropods, it's manageable prey, especially for juveniles. There's even a chance Fukui titan was larger, possibly reaching 16 meters, but either way, Japan's sauropods weren't supergiants, and in a land overflowing with predators, that was a serious problem. And the Spinosaurid wasn't alone. Japan also hosted a tyrannosauroid, not a true tyrannosaurid like T-Rex, but a more primitive relative within the Tyrannosauroidea superfamily. Like the Spino, this animal is known only from teeth, and like the Spino, it remains unnamed. But unlike the Spino, this animal was clearly built to hunt other dinosaurs. Its teeth were designed to puncture, crush, and slice into large-bodied prey like sauropods and hadrosaurs. In a direct confrontation between this animal and the Spinosaur, you could debate the outcome, but I know where I'd put my money. What makes this tyrannosauroid especially important is its size. Its teeth were so large that paleontologists had to rethink when tyrannosaur ancestors actually started getting big. Current thinking suggests it may have been comparable in size to the much later Apatosaurus, meaning around 6.5 meters, or 21 feet long, and because it was more primitive, it likely still had long, powerful arms with sharp claws, making it a more versatile hunter than later tyrannosaurids. And then, there was the third musketeer of Japan's large theropods, Fukuiraptor, a member of the Megaraptorinae. If there's one theme emerging here, it's that Cretaceous Japan really loved predators with terrifying arms. Megaraptorans were all about forelimbs, massive, hypermobile arms ending in 2 enormous, razor-sharp claws. Fukuiraptor was no exception. Those claws could pin prey, tear it apart, and even lift struggling victims toward its mouth, where a truly horrifying set of teeth awaited. And those teeth deserve special attention. Fukuiraptor's teeth were a nightmare hybrid. From Carcharodontosaurids, they borrowed flattened blade-like shapes with serrations and wrinkled enamel. From Tyrannosaurids, they inherited oblique blood grooves near the serrations, features that allowed blood to flow freely during a bite, speeding up blood loss and preventing the teeth from getting stuck. This meant Fukuiraptor could bite rapidly and repeatedly, causing catastrophic damage in seconds. Despite all this, it was surprisingly light. At around 5 meters long and only about 300 kilograms, or 660 pounds, it weighed less than some grizzly bears. Hollow, slender bones made it incredibly fast. Nothing was outrunning it. And to make things worse, the largest known specimen was actually immature, meaning adults grew even larger. With a Spinosaur, a giant tyrannosauroid, and a hyper-fast Megaraptor all sharing the same landscape, herbivores in early Cretaceous Japan were living on borrowed time. And somehow, life still thrived.
Despite the overwhelming number of predators prowling the forests and floodplains, herbivorous dinosaurs didn't just survive in early Cretaceous Japan, they flourished. The richness of the environment allowed massive populations to persist, even under constant threat. Among the most successful were the hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, which seemed to adapt perfectly to this dangerous landscape. Japan hosted several species, including the small and compact Koshisaurus, the medium-sized Fukuiraptor, and the heavyweight of the group, an Edmontosaurine-grade hadrosaur that may have rivaled local sauropods in sheer bulk. At its largest, this animal was enormous, but even size had its limits. Juveniles were still vulnerable, and even adults weren't entirely safe when facing coordinated attacks or ambush predators. Alongside them lived various iguanodontids, animals built for powerful chewing and constant movement through dense vegetation. These dinosaurs were sturdy, but again, in a place this predator-heavy, sturdiness only went so far. In Cretaceous Japan, being big didn't guarantee survival, it just delayed the inevitable. Some dinosaurs tried a different strategy entirely. Instead of running or growing larger, they armored up. Ankylosaurs were surprisingly common here, known from both teeth and fossilized trackways. While we don't yet know exactly what kind of armor they wore or whether they had tail clubs, living among so many carnivores likely placed intense evolutionary pressure on them to develop serious defenses. Thick armor, spiked bodies, and possibly bone-crushing tail weapons would have made them some of the few animals predators thought twice about attacking. Predation pressure didn't stop with herbivores. Other theropods had to contend with competition as well, and Japan just kept producing more of them. And once again, claws were the theme. Two particularly strange groups were well represented: ornithomimosaurs and therizinosaurs, both famous for their unusual hand structures. The Japanese ornithomimosaur, tyrannomimus, meaning tyrant mimic, was especially weird. Unlike its more famous relatives like Dinochirus, tyrannomimus was human-sized, not gigantic. But what really set it apart were its claws. In many ornithomimosaurs, claws are curved but blunt, likely used for digging or gathering vegetation. In tyrannomimus, however, the claws were sharp. That alone suggests a different lifestyle. Tooth structure supports this idea. While mostly adapted for plant eating, some teeth still showed omnivorous traits. The most likely scenario is that tyrannomimus was primarily herbivorous but opportunistic, using its claws and teeth to snatch insects, small vertebrates, or carrion when the opportunity arose. Therizinosaurs added even more weirdness to the mix. Paleontologists are aware of at least 3 types in Japan, though only one has been formally named, Paralitherozinosaurus, and it didn't even live during the early Cretaceous. The others are known only from fragmentary remains. Based on what we do know, they were probably on the smaller side compared to giants like Therizinosaurus itself. But even small therizinosaurs had enormous claws. These animals are famous for having the longest claws of any terrestrial animal ever, and Japan's species were no exception. What exactly those claws were used for is still debated. Many researchers think they were mainly used for pulling down vegetation, digging, or stripping branches. Others argue they played roles in mating displays, intimidation, or self-defense. Some studies suggest the claws were too brittle for slashing, but well-suited for piercing, showing maximum strain resistance during piercing motions. So while they might not have been slicing predators apart, they could certainly deliver painful, potentially lethal jabs if pushed.
Adding to the confusion was Fukuiraptor, a dog-sized dinosaur that baffled paleontologists when it was described. Initially, it looked more like a dromaeosaur, a raptor, due to its body proportions, but closer study revealed it was actually a therizinosaur and the first of its kind found outside the group's typical range. Its raptor-like appearance was chalked up to convergent evolution. Unlike its later relatives, Fukuiraptor still had meat on the menu. Its teeth were pointed and recurved,
though some lacked serrations or flattened at the tips, while others were spatula-shaped. Combined with a long neck, this suggests a mixed diet, mostly plants, supplemented with insects and small vertebrates. And for those small vertebrates, danger was everywhere. Japan was crawling with small predators, true dromaeosaurs, avian dinosaurs like Fukuiraptor's smaller cousins, and even an undescribed species possibly comparable in size to Jurassic Park's velociraptors. These animals preferred dense inland forests and stayed close to fresh water sources where prey was abundant. And they didn't just hunt mammals and reptiles. They likely preyed heavily on small ornithischians like Albolophosaurus and the adorably strange Psilocypsic gnathus-like forms that were common at the time. In truth, early Cretaceous Japan wasn't suffering from a dinosaur infestation. It was experiencing an explosion of life. Everywhere you looked, something was moving, crawling, climbing, or swimming. Freshwater turtles were everywhere. Frogs and toads existed in staggering diversity. Insects were absolutely out of control. If you're not a fan of bugs, spiders, and other invertebrates, this place would have been your worst nightmare. Some swampy regions rivaled the Carboniferous in sheer creep factor. And the vertebrates weren't much better. Lizards and snakes of all sizes filled the undergrowth, including legless lizards that looked just enough like snakes to give you a heart attack before you realized what you were seeing. But the swamps saved their worst surprises for the water. Here lived Choristoteres, extinct crocodile-like reptiles that varied wildly in size and niche. Some had long, narrow snouts like modern gharials, perfect for catching fish. Others had shorter, broader jaws like alligators, suggesting a more aggressive diet that could have included human-sized prey. Though they looked like crocodiles, this was pure convergent evolution. Some species may have been fully aquatic, spending almost their entire lives in the water. And then there were actual crocodilians. Japan hosted goniophalidids, an extinct family of heavily armored neosuchians. They had bony plates on their backs and bellies, making them living tanks. Their jaws delivered crushing bites, and they likely hunted by ambush, waiting motionless at the water's edge for anything careless enough to wander too close. And if you thought the swamps were bad, the ocean wasn't much better, at least not for long. At first, the waters surrounding early Cretaceous Japan were relatively calm by prehistoric standards. Marine predators existed, but they were surprisingly rare. Pliosaurs were probably the top dogs, given their global abundance at the time. And you could also expect to find a handful of plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and sharks. But overall, the seas were quieter than you might expect. And the reason for that lies in one of Earth's lesser-known extinction events, the Aptian extinction. Ironically, the same volcanic activity that made Japan's land ecosystem so fertile contributed to chaos in the oceans, just not from Japan itself. Massive eruptions forming the Raj Mahal traps in India pumped enormous amounts of greenhouse gases and toxins into the atmosphere and oceans, triggering widespread marine die-offs. Marine reptiles suffered badly, and even land animals felt the effects. It's thought that the last surviving stegosaurs vanished during this time, which may explain why none are known from Japan. Mammal relatives like Tritolodonts were also wiped out. As a result, groups like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs were struggling, making Japan's waters relatively less dangerous for a brief window of time. But that calm did not last. As the early Cretaceous transitioned into the late Cretaceous, everything changed. Sea levels rose dramatically, over 100 meters higher than today. The oceans were warmer, larger, and covered about 10% more of Earth's surface. That meant more space for life, and more space for nightmares. This is when Mosasaurs entered the scene. These marine reptiles didn't just appear, they took over, and Japan became one of their strongholds. Unlike some regions where Mosasaurs shared the seas with other apex predators, Japan's waters were dominated almost exclusively by them. Sharks were oddly rare here, making this one of the few times in Earth's history where the absence of sharks was actually a bad thing. The most infamous mosasaur present was Mosasaurus itself. While best known from the western interior seaway of North America, it did just fine in Japan too. The local species wasn't the massive Mosasaurus hoffmanni, but rather Mosasaurus otsukai, which could still reach around 12 meters or 40 feet long.
That firmly placed it at the top of the food chain. Its jaws were packed with robust teeth built for slicing through flesh, and just about anything was on the menu. Fossils suggest it ate large fish, birds, turtles, other marine reptiles, and possibly even dinosaur carcasses that drifted out to sea. Mosasaurus was also highly aggressive. Bite marks on other mosasaurs suggest cannibalism wasn't off the table. But Mosasaurus wasn't the only threat. Medium-sized mosasaurs like Tyrannosaurus-like forms and Tyrannosaurus relatives prowled the waters too. One of these, Tyrannosaurus, reached about 8.5 meters or 29 feet and specialized in faster, more agile prey. It had weaker neck muscles than Mosasaurus, but greater mobility and excellent binocular vision, making it a precision hunter. It preferred deeper waters where it was less likely to become prey itself. Going deeper still, you'd encounter Phosphorosaurus, a smaller mosasaur ranging from 3 to 6 meters in length. This animal was an oddball. Its body plan suggests it was a poor swimmer, relying instead on ambush tactics. Large eyes helped it hunt in dark, deep waters, and its slender jaws with small teeth were perfect for catching squid and bioluminescent fish. It occupied a niche similar to modern lanternfish predators, haunting the twilight zone of the ancient seas. Then there was Megapatrygyrus, the cheetah of mosasaurs. Roughly comparable in size to a great white shark, this animal had massive wing-like flippers with hypermobile joints. It could brake suddenly, pitch its body, and make sharp turns at high speed, essentially functioning like a biological fighter jet. Fast prey stood no chance. These waters teemed with fish, and fish attracted flyers.
Pterosaurs returned in force, and this time they were enormous. The largest known from Japan is an undescribed tyrannosaurid-like pterosaur with a wingspan of 6.8 meters or 22 feet, the largest pterosaur ever found in Asia. Joining it were asdarchids like Nipponopterus with wingspans around 3.6 meters. On land, these animals would have towered over humans, stalking prey with massive beaks and long necks. Though coastal, many likely hunted terrestrial animals as much as fish. Birds joined the feast too. Chupornis-like flightless diving birds patrolled coastal waters, using webbed feet to plunge to depths of up to 80 meters. But their presence meant danger was constant, from mosasaurs, from plesiosaurs, and even from each other. For a brief period, Japan was one of the few places where pliosaurs and mosasaurs coexisted, possibly even competing. And if that wasn't enough, giant cephalopods arrived. Harbortoothus and Yezotoothus, massive squid-like predators, appeared late in the Cretaceous. They were as large or larger than modern giant squids, but armed with more lethal beaks. Unlike today's deep-sea giants, these animals spent time in coastal waters, making swimming a truly questionable life choice. All of this chaos continued until the very end of the Cretaceous. And then came the asteroid. The final days of the Cretaceous were anything but peaceful, but the KT extinction event brought a sudden, brutal end to the madness. In a geological instant, ecosystems that had taken tens of millions of years to assemble were wiped away. The mosasaurs vanished, the pterosaurs disappeared. Nearly all dinosaurs, predators and herbivores alike, were erased. The forests fell silent, the seas emptied. Japan's prehistoric nightmare finally ended. In the aftermath, mammals crept out of the shadows, birds took to the skies, and life rebuilt itself once again. Over time, tectonics reshaped the land, sea levels fell, and Japan drifted into the familiar island chain we recognize today. The monsters were gone, the chaos faded, and in their place came humans. Now, when we think of Japan, we think of sushi, animation, bullet trains, and pop culture icons like Godzilla. And maybe that's fitting. Godzilla is, in many ways, a memory, a symbolic echo of a time when Japan was truly ruled by monsters. Not mythical ones, but real animals with claws, teeth, armor, and wingspans that defied belief. So yes, at least now we have sushi and anime. And maybe that's a fair trade. So what are your thoughts on today's topic?
Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, PaleoPulse, so you won't miss any of our upcoming posts. Thanks for watching. See you next time.